The cafe was alive with the usual buzz of clinking cups and quiet conversations when he walked in. A man who exuded power with every step, his presence commanding the room. His eyes scanned the crowd, but they landed on one person, the young waitress, unnoticed by most but not by him. With a cold, mocking smile, he made a challenge that seemed harmless at first, but as her fingers brushed the keys of the old piano, the air shifted. The music that followed was unlike anything anyone could have imagined. It wasn't just a performance, it was a revelation. And in that moment, everything changed. What secret was she hiding? And how far would it push him to the edge of his own soul? The evening air in the bustling city cafe was alive with its usual hum. The clink of coffee cups, the low murmur of conversations, and the soft rustle of menus created a sense of comfort, a refuge for those seeking a moment's respite from the world outside. But tonight, something felt different. The door creaked open with an air of finality, and in stepped a man who immediately drew the eyes of everyone in the room. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and moved with the kind of confidence that commanded attention. Every step he took seemed deliberate, calculated, like he was walking through life with the certainty that the world was his to conquer. The regulars looked up, momentarily pausing in their conversations, drawn to him. His gaze swept the room like a hawk searching for prey, until it landed on one person, the young waitress. Unnoticed by most, but not by him. Her name was Clara, and she carried herself quietly, moving between tables with practiced ease. There was something about her, an aura of quiet resilience, but no one could have guessed the secret she harbored, one that had been carefully tucked away for years. Tonight, though, that secret was about to surface in the most unexpected way. With a brief smirk, the man rose from his seat and made his way over to her, his presence suddenly imposing. He didn't wait for her to approach. No, he snapped his fingers, the sound sharp, demanding. "Come here," he commanded, his voice low, but filled with authority. Clara hesitated for a split second, caught off guard by his directness. Her heart raced. There was something unsettling about him, something that didn't sit right, yet she quickly composed herself and walked over. "Yes, sir?" Her voice was steady, though she couldn't quite hide the hint of nervousness that crept in. The man leaned back in his chair, a cocky grin stretching across his face. "I've heard this cafe has hidden gems," he began, his eyes gleaming with an almost cruel amusement. "Maybe someone like you has a talent waiting to be discovered." "Do you?" Clara blinked. Was he serious? She felt her throat tighten as she tried to process his words. Before she could answer, he pointed to the corner of the room where an old, worn piano stood, gathering dust. "Play," he commanded, his tone thick with mockery. A heavy silence fell over the room as every pair of eyes turned to her. Clara's pulse quickened. She had never been asked to perform here, not like this, not with so many watching. She had never told anyone about her music. It was a part of her past she had buried long ago. Her fingers twitched at the thought of the piano keys, but she couldn't say no. I'm just a waitress," she stammered, her heart pounding in her chest. He chuckled, a sound that sent a shiver down her spine. "Oh, don't play coy. Come on, let's see what you've got." He waved a hand dismissively. "Or is this too much for you?" The pressure mounted, but Clara's resolve hardened. With one last glance at the piano, she knew there was no turning back. What was he expecting? A simple tune, or something else entirely? With each step toward the piano, the room seemed to hold its breath. Clara's hands were shaking as she placed them on the piano keys. His words stung, but they only fueled something deep within her. She had spent years hiding this side of herself, always worried about what people might think, always playing small. But tonight, in the face of his ridicule, she felt something shift. Maybe this was the moment to stop being afraid. The man's eyes glinted with amusement as he crossed his arms, waiting for a performance that would undoubtedly fall short. The crowd, too, waited. No one expected anything remarkable from her, least of all him. What could a waitress possibly have to offer on the piano? But Clara didn't hesitate. She closed her eyes for just a moment, allowing the memories of her past to flood in. The hours she spent as a child sitting at a piano that had belonged to her grandmother. The music that flowed through her, untamed, yet held back by years of self-doubt. The first note rang out, soft but resonant. It echoed in the room, drawing the eyes of every person present. The sound was like nothing they had expected. Clara's fingers danced across the keys, effortlessly weaving a melody that was powerful, moving, and so far beyond the mocking tone of the man who had challenged her. The cafe fell into complete silence, the music drawing everyone in. The rich man's grin faltered as the complexity and beauty of her playing became impossible to ignore. Clara wasn't just playing for them, she was playing for herself, reclaiming something that had always been hers, but had been locked away for too long. With every note, her confidence grew. The rich man's amusement began to fade, replaced by a mixture of surprise and, dare he admit it, awe. This wasn't just a show, it was a revelation. His eyes, once filled with smug superiority, now held something deeper: respect, perhaps even regret for the cruel words he had spoken moments before. The music continued to unfold, rising and falling in a way that captured the hearts of the room. What had begun as mockery had turned into something far more meaningful. But the question remained: would Clara be able to finish what she had started? Could the man and the room ever see her as more than just a waitress again? The piano's sound filled the cafe, and in an instant, the atmosphere shifted. Gone was the smugness of the rich man and the snickers from the crowd. Clara's melody had done something no one could have anticipated. It had captured their hearts, drawn them into a world of emotion and beauty. Clara's fingers moved with ease now, the initial hesitation gone. Her hands seemed to know the keys in a way that words could never describe. The music flowed like a river, cascading over the walls, sweeping away the tension and the judgment that had clung to the room. For the first time, the patrons weren't just sitting at tables. They were leaning in, eyes wide, unable to look away. The rich man sat at the edge of his chair, his face an open canvas of astonishment. He had expected her to fail, to stumble, but what he heard now was something completely different. Each note was a piece of her soul, laid bare for the world to hear. It was raw, it was real, and it was more beautiful than he could ever have imagined. As Clara's music rose to a crescendo, the cafe seemed to hold its collective breath. The crowd was spellbound, swept away by the sheer emotion pouring from the piano. The rich man's earlier mockery had turned to silence, his usual bravado replaced by an overwhelming sense of awe. In the corner of the room, the old man who had been reading his newspaper looked up, his glasses perched on the tip of his nose, eyes now focused entirely on Clara. The couple in the corner, who had been quietly arguing, stopped mid-sentence, their attention fully consumed by the haunting beauty of the melody. The bartender, normally indifferent to everything, leaned over the counter, eyes wide. It was a moment of magic, a moment where everything stopped and music alone reigned. Clara was no longer the shy waitress who had hidden in the background. She had become the heart of the cafe, a symbol of untapped potential, a living testament to the fact that anyone could have greatness within them, if only they dared to show it. The final note lingered in the air, suspended for just a heartbeat before it faded into the quiet. For a long moment no one spoke. The only sound was the soft echo of her music still resonating in the room. The silence stretched long, and Clara sat still, her hands resting on the keys. She had done it. She had shown them all what they had never expected to see. The moment Clara's final note reverberated through the cafe, the entire room was frozen in silence. The crowd, once murmuring in hushed tones or laughing among themselves, had now fallen still, hanging on every delicate echo of the melody. For a brief instant, time seemed to suspend itself, as though the music had woven a thread connecting each person in the room. But amidst this collective stillness, one man, the one who had instigated it all, sat motionless, his world completely shattered. The wealthy man, who had previously oozed with confidence and superiority, no longer looked the same. His face, once smug and self-assured, now appeared almost vacant, a blank canvas overtaken by disbelief. His chest tightened, and his breath, shallow and uneven, betrayed a vulnerability he had long since forgotten how to acknowledge. His hands, which had once been raised in mockery, now rested on the edge of the table, lifeless. He had expected to see failure. He had expected the waitress to falter, to make a fool of herself in front of him and everyone else in the room. It had been a game to him, a way to reinforce his power and superiority. But instead, he had witnessed something extraordinary. What Clara had played was no simple tune. It was a symphony of emotions, a deep well of experiences and struggles that no one had anticipated. Every note seemed to strike a chord deep within him, stirring a reflection he hadn't known he was capable of. In that instant, the man realized how little he understood the world he lived in. For so long he had viewed people through a lens of wealth and status, measuring their worth based on their position in life. Clara's music had undone that worldview, laying bare the truth that talent and depth aren't found in bank accounts or titles. They can be found in the quietest corners, in the hearts of those you might least expect. As the applause rang out around the cafe, he remained seated, unaware of the sounds of celebration surrounding him. His thoughts were elsewhere, his mind swirling with the implications of what he had just witnessed. The arrogance that had fueled him now felt foreign, like a cloak he had once worn but could no longer fit into. The waitress, Clara, wasn't just a simple woman working a shift behind the counter. She was an artist, a person whose passion had been hidden for far too long, perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of necessity. But in that moment, Clara had exposed something raw, something vulnerable, and in doing so, had made him confront his own prejudice. He had misjudged her, and that realization hit him harder than any of her notes ever could. The shift in his perception wasn't something that could be dismissed easily. The realization left him unsettled, his usual confidence replaced with a profound sense of humility. It was as if the walls he had built around himself had crumbled, exposing the fragility of his own judgments. He had thought himself untouchable, above reproach. But Clara's music had reached deep within him, revealing a truth he could no longer ignore. He had been wrong. As the music faded into silence, the man looked around, almost as if to confirm that what he had experienced wasn't just a fleeting moment. His gaze swept over the cafe, over the faces of the people whose lives he had never truly seen before. The patrons, too, were different now, no longer just background figures in his life, but people with stories, with depth. He wasn't sure how to move forward, but one thing was clear. Everything had changed. The applause that followed Clara's hauntingly beautiful performance was deafening. It seemed to echo against the walls, a collective appreciation for the music that had swept through the room, leaving everyone in a state of awe. Yet, amidst the cheers, one figure remained still. The rich man, who had set this challenge in motion with such arrogance, sat motionless, a storm of emotions brewing within him. His fingers lingered on the edge of his wine glass, but his eyes were far away, lost in thought, caught in the whirlwind of self-realization. The room buzzed with excitement, but the man's mind couldn't escape the moment he had just witnessed. He had come into the cafe expecting to humiliate Clara, to make a point about his own superiority, but instead she had humbled him in the most profound way. Her music had done what his wealth, power, and bravado could never do. It had exposed the hollowness of his assumptions, making him realize just how wrong he had been. As the applause began to settle, the man slowly rose from his seat, his actions tentative, as if each step carried the weight of everything he had previously believed. He made his way toward Clara, his heart pounding louder with each movement. What would he say? How could he possibly approach her after the mockery he had made of her? Clara, still seated at the piano, was surrounded by well-wishers who complimented her on her playing. She had not expected such a performance, but her heart swelled with pride. The music had been her release, her way of showing the world something that had always been a part of her, but was locked away, hidden beneath the surface. Yet in the midst of the congratulations, she saw him, walking toward her with an unexpected air of humility. Her gaze met his, and she froze. His eyes, once filled with arrogance, were now filled with something different, a vulnerability that was impossible to ignore. She had no idea what he intended, but something in his approach felt different, like he was about to speak words she had never expected. When he reached her, he hesitated, his lips parting as though searching for the right words. Finally, his voice broke the silence. "I owe you an apology," he said, the words almost foreign to him. His voice was soft, stripped of the usual bravado. Clara's brow furrowed. She had braced herself for everything but this. The rich man, the one who had mocked her, now stood before her, humbled and remorseful. She had no words for him at first, her shock mingling with a deep sense of confusion. Why was he apologizing? He continued, his eyes now locked with hers. "I didn't understand, didn't see you for who you really are. I judged you based on my own foolish assumptions. But your music? It was something else." I've never heard anything like it." The cafe had fallen silent, all eyes now on them. The patrons, who had once been spectators, were now witnesses to something unexpected. A wealthy, arrogant man stripped of his pride, offering an apology to a waitress who had shown him the raw power of her talent. Clara took a moment to process his words. She had expected this moment to be filled with anger, with resentment, but instead she felt a quiet, steady pulse of understanding. The apology wasn't just for her, it was for him too. He had been forced to confront the arrogance he had carried for so long. She could see it in his eyes. With a quiet nod, Clara offered him a response, her voice soft but firm. "Thank you," she said, her words carrying weight. "It's not just about the music. It's about seeing people for who they are. We all deserve that." As the words hung in the air, something shifted between them, something unspoken, but understood. The rich man had been given a glimpse of a world he had never known, and in that moment, both of them were changed. The cafe erupted into applause once more, but this time, it wasn't just for the music, it was for the unlikeliest of moments. A lesson learned, a transformation complete, a new understanding between two people from worlds that had once seemed so far apart. And as the night drew to a close, Clara returned to her work, her steps lighter, her heart fuller. She had not only shown them her talent, she had shown them her truth, and that, in the end, was the greatest gift of all. That night, the cafe had been transformed into something far greater than just a simple eatery or a place to grab a drink. It became a stage for change, a place where not only music but also life itself resonated in ways no one had anticipated. The flickering candlelight and the gentle hum of conversation had given way to a deeper understanding, a profound revelation that would leave a lasting mark on everyone present. The waitress, Clara, had unknowingly become the catalyst for something that transcended the boundaries of class, wealth, and social status. As the applause from the cafe's patrons continued to echo in Clara's ears, her fingers still resting gently on the piano keys, she realized that the music she had shared was far more than just a performance. It was a statement. It was a moment of vulnerability, an unveiling of her innermost self, and a powerful challenge to everything the wealthy man, and perhaps everyone else in the room, had taken for granted. Clara had stood tall, had risen above the circumstances of her life, and in doing so, had shattered the misconceptions that often surrounded people like her. The wealthy man, who had been the source of so much mockery, now sat among the patrons with a newfound respect in his eyes. His earlier arrogance had melted away like ice under the sun, leaving him raw, exposed, and deeply reflective. Clara's music had struck a chord deep within him, one that no amount of money or power could have ever touched. It was the kind of truth that only genuine talent could convey, the kind of lesson that could never be learned in a classroom or a boardroom. And in that moment, Clara had taught everyone something invaluable. Never judge someone's worth based on their appearance, their job, or the position they hold in life. The man had come into the cafe believing that his wealth and status made him superior. He had seen Clara as nothing more than a lowly waitress, someone who existed in the shadows of his world. But what he had failed to understand was that Clara, like so many others, was far more than the sum of her outward circumstances. She was a person of depth, of skill, of untapped potential. The lesson didn't end with him. The other patrons, who had silently observed Clara's challenge and subsequent triumph, felt the weight of her message too. For them, it was a reminder that they too had been guilty of passing judgments based on superficial observations. The young man at the table in the corner, who had been so quick to laugh at the rich man's antics, now sat with a humbled expression, as if he had just experienced something that shifted his perspective forever. The elderly couple, who had sipped their coffee without much interest, were now leaning toward one another, sharing a quiet conversation about the wonder they had just witnessed. Even the staff, who had witnessed the transformation firsthand, now looked at Clara with a sense of awe and admiration. The rich man's apology, though unexpected, was the final piece of the puzzle. He had been forced to confront the truth that wealth could never define someone's worth, and it was a lesson that would stay with him for the rest of his life. As he watched Clara quietly return to her duties, he realized that the greatest treasures in life are not those that can be bought. They are the qualities that reside deep within each individual, waiting to be uncovered. Clara's gift to the world was her music, yes, but it was also her courage to be vulnerable in a world that often demands perfection. She had shown the cafe, and everyone in it, that talent is not confined to the rich or the privileged. It lives in the hearts of people from all walks of life, often hidden beneath layers of judgment, preconceived notions, and societal expectations. But when given the chance to shine, that talent could light up the world in ways no one ever expected. As the night drew to a close, Clara's extraordinary performance continued to resonate in the minds of all who had witnessed it. The cafe, once just a simple establishment for dining, had become something greater, a place where assumptions were shattered, where judgment was replaced with understanding, and where every person, no matter their station, had been reminded of the intrinsic value that resides within each of us. The lesson was clear, and it was timeless. Never, ever judge someone by their appearance or position. Because the true worth of a person can only be seen when you look beyond the surface and listen to the music they carry within. And for Clara, that night wasn't just about the applause. It was about something far deeper, a reminder to herself and to others that our worth is not defined by our circumstances, but by the courage to reveal who we truly are.